Persepolis by Mar is a graphic memoir that tells the story of the author's childhood and early adulthood in Iran during and after the Islamic Revolution. Through the lens of Satrapi's personal experiences, the graphic novel explores themes such as identity, political oppression, the complexities of growing up, and the effects of war. The narrative, told in black and white illustrations, blends humor, tragedy, and political commentary, creating a powerful portrayal of an individual's journey amid societal upheaval. Context and setting: Iran during and after the Islamic Revolution. Persepolis is set in Iran during the 1970s and 1980s, a period marked by significant political and cultural transformation. The Islamic Revolution, which culminated in the overthrow of the Shah's regime in 1979, brought about profound changes in Iranian society. What had been a relatively secular and modernizing society under the Shah turned into a repressive theocratic state under Ayatollah Khomeini's rule. The book reflects these tumultuous years and provides insight into the complexities of living through such political changes. Satrapi's story begins in Tehran, where she grew up in a progressive and politically active family. Her parents were secular, and her mother, in particular, was outspoken in her opposition to the regime. Through her eyes, readers witness the contradictions of living in a society where personal freedom was rapidly being suppressed. The book highlights how Satrapi's identity as both a child and a young woman becomes intertwined with the political and social climate of her homeland. The central themes of Persepolis: identity and self-discovery. One of the most prominent themes in Persepolis is the exploration of identity. Satrapi recounts her struggles with reconciling her personal beliefs, desires, and identity with the demands of the society around her. As a child, she is caught between the values of her family, which are progressive and secular, and the expectations imposed by the Islamic State. The enforced veil, the restrictions on women, and the oppressive social norms all contribute to her feelings of alienation. As Satrapi grows older, her sense of self becomes more complex. Her time in Vienna, where she moves as a teenager to escape the political repression of Iran, further complicates her understanding of who she is. She faces the challenges of living in a foreign culture while dealing with the trauma of her homeland's political turmoil. In both Iran and Austria, Satrapi navigates the tensions between her Iranian heritage and the pressures of a Western world that often views her as an outsider. The search for identity is particularly vivid in her rebellious moments. Satrapi's experimentation with Western culture, listening to punk rock, smoking, and exploring romantic relationships, becomes an act of resistance against the conservative values imposed on her. However, this also reflects the inner conflict she experiences as she tries to carve out a space for herself in both Iranian and Western societies. Political oppression and the loss of freedom. The political atmosphere of Iran under the Islamic Revolution is another central theme in Persepolis. The story portrays the stark contrast between the pre-revolutionary era, which was characterized by Western influence, and the post-revolutionary period, where Iran underwent a radical shift toward a religious state. This political upheaval has a profound impact on Satrapi's family and their way of life. In the early parts of the memoir, Satrapi reflects on the chaos that the revolution brought, including the brutal repression by both the Shah's regime and the Islamic government. The terror of the 1980s, marked by widespread arrests, executions, and the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War, creates a backdrop of fear and uncertainty. For Satrapi's family, the revolution and its aftermath mean the loss of personal freedoms, the restriction of civil liberties, and the stifling of political dissent. Satrapi does not shy away from depicting the absurdity and cruelty of the regime. One example is the contrast between the official rhetoric of the Islamic Republic and the reality of daily life. The regime's slogans and propaganda proclaim a vision of an ideal society, but Satrapi shows the grim reality of widespread corruption, hypocrisy, and violence. Her illustrations convey the emotional toll of living under constant surveillance, with characters in the story regularly forced to hide their true selves to avoid persecution. War and trauma. The Iran-Iraq War, which began in 1980 and lasted for 8 years, plays a crucial role in shaping Satrapi's worldview. The war is a backdrop to the political upheaval and directly affects the lives of ordinary Iranians, including Satrapi's family. The memoir vividly depicts the horrors of war, including bombings, the loss of life, and the emotional toll it takes on individuals. As a young girl, Satrapi is exposed to the devastation of war, and her illustrations capture the sense of fear and loss that permeated Iranian society during this time. In the book, war is not just a physical conflict, but also an emotional and psychological struggle. Satrapi grapples with the trauma of the war's impact on her family and the people around her. Her experiences, including her isolation during the war and her eventual departure to Vienna, highlight the emotional scars left by conflict. This theme is amplified by the dark, stark illustrations that accompany her storytelling, evoking the starkness of her lived experiences. Gender and women's rights. Gender roles and the oppression of women are also central themes in Persepolis. The enforcement of the veil and the strict laws regulating women's behavior in public are constant reminders of the regime's authoritarian control. Satrapi's personal struggles with these restrictions, her resistance to wearing the veil, her frustration with the limitations placed on women, illustrate the ways in which gender was weaponized by the state to control women's bodies and identities. Satrapi's depiction of her evolving understanding of womanhood reveals the deeply personal nature of her rebellion. She constantly resists the constraints placed on her, whether through her refusal to conform to the traditional female roles dictated by the regime, or her rebellious acts, such as her preference for Western clothing and music. At the same time, Satrapi shows the subtle ways in which women find agency, creating spaces of resistance within the confines of the system. The graphic novel form and its impact. The format of Persepolis as a graphic novel is integral to the power of its narrative. Satrapi's use of black and white illustrations allows for a striking contrast between the light and dark elements of the story, effectively conveying the complexity of her experiences. The minimalist style of the illustrations adds to the emotional intensity, making the book accessible while also capable of tackling deep, complex themes. The graphic novel form also allows for a mix of humor and tragedy, which is characteristic of Satrapi's storytelling. The humor comes through in her portrayal of everyday life in Iran, such as the absurdity of some of the political situations, while the tragedy is revealed in the more serious moments, like the death of loved ones or the trauma of the war. This balance between lightness and darkness captures the contradictions of growing up in such a turbulent environment. Furthermore, the visual nature of Persepolis gives readers an immediate emotional connection to Satrapi's experiences. The images of her as a young girl grappling with her growing awareness of the world around her evoke a deep sense of empathy. The art is not just an illustration of events, but a way to communicate the emotional weight of these events. In Persepolis, Marjane Satrapi gives voice to the experiences of a generation caught between the cultural upheaval of the Iranian Revolution and the global complexities of the post-revolutionary world. The memoir not only tells the personal story of a young girl coming of age in a politically charged and violently charged environment, but also provides a window into the broader political and social challenges of 20th century Iran. Through its vivid portrayal of identity, political oppression, war, and the struggle for women's rights, Persepolis remains a powerful and timely work. Satrapi's blend of humor and tragedy, coupled with her unique visual style, makes this memoir a deeply human story that resonates with readers of all backgrounds. By transforming her personal experiences into a universal narrative, Satrapi invites readers to reflect on themes of freedom, resistance, and the ongoing fight for justice.